This is episode 17 of Watching Every Studio Ghibli Movie. Today I watched Kagarashi no Arrietty, or The Secret World of Arrietty, which aired in 2010. Spoiler warnings, and let's get started. Background info. While this isn't the first Ghibli movie I remember watching, nor the one which was most impactful on me, it was the first that I remember watching in theaters, if that's worth anything. Obviously I would have been like 7 at the time, so I don't really remember anything holistic about the plot or characters, mostly just very specific moments like Sho giving Arrietty the sugar cube and the specific line of dialogue where Sho asks if it's okay for him to look at Arrietty. Needless to say, I was constantly going, "Oh yeah, I have seen this before," while watching, which was kind of fun. However, I will say that beyond a sort of baseline intrigue I had with this film due to nostalgia, I found it relatively difficult to stay actively engaged with. Simply put, I wasn't detecting much depth or substance to really sink my teeth into and think about. Not that a movie has to have that to be good by any means, but I do think that Arrietty would have benefited if its script had spent a little more time in the oven. For example, I think the rate of information communication could have been faster. The specific scene I'm thinking of happens right at the start of the film when Arrietty's mom exclaims that she likes sugar once when she's first introduced, and then a second time when Arrietty and her dad go off on their expedition. It definitely wasn't like the movie was beating me over the head with the fact that Arrietty's mom wanted sugar. If anything, it was even more realistic that Hamali would remind her family multiple times of what groceries to get while they're out, but obviously one of these two moments could have been cut and the amount of relevant information that the audience learns wouldn't change much, if at all. And I want to put an emphasis on the use of the phrase relevant information because obviously we do learn something about Hamali when she repeats her request. It tells us that she's more uncomfortable about their living situation than Pod or Arrietty, which gets a sort of payoff when Sho gives them the kitchen to the dollhouse. The amount of joy Hamali experiences is better felt by the audience because of what we know about her, but I guess I just didn't feel like it was quite enough development to get me to care a ton about her, especially considering that Arrietty's family seems to be doing just fine. They're out of sugar, but Arrietty's room is lush and decorated. The family eats multiple delicious looking meals throughout the movie, and well, I mean, they haven't been caught yet. The main conflict of the film is set off by Arrietty getting in over her head. If she hadn't gotten spotted by Sho on multiple occasions, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't have just been able to keep taking food from the house and not getting caught. This is all just an overly long explanation of why I think the movie isn't quite as tight and engaging as other Ghibli films, and I'll be honest, I had to pause a few times to take breaks while watching because of how bored I was getting. There were still a handful of individually entertaining bits sprinkled throughout, as one would expect from a Ghibli quality film. Probably the most random and specific to me example of this was Arrietty's ponytail. They somehow managed to get the feel of her hair to match my own almost perfectly. Like the weight and thickness of it look the way that my hair feels, but of course way smoother and more perfect. To anyone who has short hair, let me tell you, never in the history of human beings has anyone put their hair up and not had a bunch of annoying stragglers come out of the ponytail to just sit on your face and annoy you. And don't even get me started on that little tuft of short hair she's got in the front. God! Visually and sonically, this movie is fantastic, though I will say that this is one of the few times that I've felt like Studio Ghibli didn't one-up their past films, which really just goes to show how high the standards have been set for them. But unfortunately, that's just kind of how setting expectations works, and I was definitely a little disappointed. And I feel kind of bad for feeling that way, because like, this is still a gorgeous film. It's just standing on the shoulders of giants. I mean, this is the first time I felt like the character designs in a Ghibli film were legitimately forgettable, other than Arrietty's adventuring outfit. On a more strictly positive note, I really like the way this movie turns what would be completely normal environments into something that feels alien and imposing and awe-inspiring and synonyms. I'm sure other people have talked about this effect to no end, especially when it comes to the specific example of scaling the viewer's perspective down, but I doubt that as many people really understand what the inherent appeal of such a perspective shift might be, and especially after watching Ponyo in the last part of this video series, I think I've figured it out. Let me explain. So, as I discussed in my video about Ponyo, I've had an obsession with being able to swim around in a flooded town or house or whatever, and I think that the draw of that situation is much the same as that of the whole Ansai perspective thing, which is present in Arrietty and many other works. Specifically, it is the ability to navigate and interact with a typical environment, but in an especially atypical manner. This is fascinating to me because it fundamentally changes the way that you have to think about the utility of each and every everything that you interact with. And most importantly, the new way that you interact with your environment is in extreme contrast to the way that you would normally interact with it. For example, I don't find the idea of swimming around the city of Atlantis particularly exciting because, at least in the incarnations that I've been exposed to, it is a city that was constructed underwater. I don't have the frame of reference for how it would feel to walk around Atlantis. It would not be laid out in a manner that was made for walking. And in much the same way, I think that Arrietty's anti-perspective thing is inherently captivating to myself and many others because we already understand what each utensil or space that she interacts with is used for, at least to us. And so seeing the contrast between what we perceive to be the functionality of them versus what the borrowers see just instantly gives you more to think about and digest. One of the most captivating scenes in this entire movie for me was when Arrietty and her dad were venturing out and using nails as a sort of bridge and staples as a ladder. It elicits that same sense of wonder I felt when watching Ponyo, even if not to the same extent. And I definitely think that Arrietty pulls off this effect better than any other animated or live action work that I can remember. As a final talking point, I'd like to discuss the interesting themes of this film. So this may or may not have been intentional, but I perceive a bit of an upper class, lower class metaphor going on between the humans and the borrowers. I say this specifically because of how the borrowers survive day to day, which is by stealing. The fact that they are called borrowers doesn't actually make much sense because they literally do steal from humans. They are taking without permission, however, similar to the homeless man who steals a loaf of bread from his local grocery store, the borrowers are not framed as evil for stealing because this is presumably what they must do to survive, and because they are not taking anything of meaningful value to the humans. I think that this makes sense as an analogy, especially when considering the dynamics of the movie's climax. Specifically, the different perspectives each of the humans have towards the borrowers. Sho wishes to help them in any way he can, seemingly out of a desire to bring purpose to his life since he knows that it may not be long before it's over. The borrowers are a group of people that his actions can influence massively and immediately, and he takes satisfaction in being able to improve their quality of life. On the other hand, Haru seems to take much more seriously the principle that stealing is bad, and therefore that the borrowers deserve to be punished. And of course, she believes herself fit to exercise said punishment. I will say that it's also possible Haru simply has a prejudice against the borrowers. Most of what I just extrapolated out of her motivations was just that, extrapolation. Furthermore, unless I missed something, the movie never clarifies what exactly she plans to do with the borrowers once she catches all of them. She doesn't want to kill them, but she obviously seems intent on removing their agency. She's clearly not acting rationally even when considering the situation from her perspective, so it's possible that it's meant to reflect something about the irrationality of class discrimination, or maybe she really is just as deep as it seems on surface level, who knows. I find all of this very interesting to think about, but it runs into a bit of a snag with the ending of the film. The movie treats it as an unfortunate necessity that Arrietty would have to move, which is compelling in its own way, but I think I would have liked it better if Sho and Sadako convinced Haru to allow the borrowers to simply stay at their house. I mean, this would have made more sense as a logical progression of events since they both seem perfectly fine sharing the space and they outnumber Haru, but moreover, it just would have been less depressing of an ending. I like the idea of a movie telling its audience that the upper class can help rise up the lower class better than one which tells its audience that the world around you isn't one that you can change, and that the people who haven't been through your struggles will be the least sympathetic towards them, even though that is probably a more accurate portrayal of real life. I guess that reading plays a little better into the sort of motif about the will to survive, which the movie nearly explicitly points out in scenes where a similarity is drawn between the borrower's situation and Sho's heart condition. But the thing is that Sho's heart condition isn't something that anyone can control, it's complete chance. But the borrower's situation is purely the result of the humans presumably killing them off. It's hard to say if the movie is saying that the world will change around you and there's nothing you can do about it, or if it's saying that actually uncontrollable things like medical conditions that you are born with can actually be influenced by a change in attitude, which Sho seems to believe by the end of the movie. Either message is literally wrong, but still at least a little interesting because it illustrates the way that different people might react to major problems in their life. I have a sneaking suspicion that I'm reading more into this work than what was put into it, but whatever, I felt more entertained when thinking about this aspect of the film, and I'd say it improved my experience. I know I've been much more lukewarm with Arrietty than many other Ghiblis, but by virtue of being a Ghibli film and thus a film of extremely impressive presentation, I think Arrietty still gets a light 6 out of 10 from me. So yeah, I would still say I liked it. Anyway, let me know what you thought of this movie down in the comments, whether you had already seen this film or if you are watching them along with me. Next up, I'm going to be watching Kokoriko Zakakara, or From Up on Poppy Hill, so stick around for that. I hope you have a wonderful day, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.